You can join today's guest heretic, Chrissie Manion Zaerpoor, for the launch of her new book, The Art of Mead Tasting and Food Pairing, this weekend on April 8th, 2017, in Portland, Oregon. So if you're in the area, please make it a point to stop by the Mead Market from noon to 4 p.m. Visit meadandfood.com for more details. In the meantime, you can listen to Chrissie's passionate discussion about the history of mead, the many categories and styles of mead, and how to choose the right mead for the right dish. Coming up next on the Nutrition Heretic Podcast.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
If you're still confused about what to eat and not getting the results you thought you'd get by going organic, go to nutritionheretic.com and download the shit list of 7 health foods to avoid like the plague for free. The shit list details what health food companies want you to believe about the crap they peddle and why the real foods they're meant to replace are far better. Stop letting big health food dump all over you and download the shit list today.
Fat is bad for you.
I just pop a pill and I'm fine.
Meat is murder.
It's time for bad food punishment. It's time for real nourishment. It's time for the Nutrition Heretic.
The following program is provided as information only and may not be construed as medical or health advice. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease. No action or inaction should be taken solely on the basis of the information provided here. Please consult with a licensed healthcare professional or doctor on any matter relating to your health and well-being. Aloha and welcome to the Nutrition Heretic Podcast. This is Adrienne here, the Nutrition Heretic, and I'm here with my trusty companion, Nikola Popovich.
Hi, everybody. Another day, another podcast.
Yeah. Did you know, Nikola, I know you're young. I know you're just a baby. But
yeah, I'm not as old as you.
Are we going to go there again? Are we going to start with this again? Yes, you're not as funny as me either. So okay, there. No, seriously though. Did you know that in the 1950s, the University of Pennsylvania, if I remember correctly, their archaeology department uncovered King Midas's tomb. And what they found was his funerary feast. And actually more than a couple of years ago, this is like 15 years ago or so, Dogfish Head Brewery in Delaware was given the recipe of the drink that they had, or at least, some basic DNA ideas of what was in there. And it was a honey mead. And so they invented a beer, which they call the Midas Touch. And they unveiled it at an event at the University of Pennsylvania. This is when I used to live like half an hour away from UPenn. And they unveiled it with like this big gala dinner, and I got to meet Michael Jackson, not the one that you're thinking, but the beer guy, Michael Jackson, both of whom are dead, actually. Michael Jackson, I think he had Parkinson's. He was a British guy. He was like very known in the beer world. And I got to shake hands with him. And there was, media and all this kind of stuff. It was a pretty cool event. And they recreated the entire feast. So, since then you know that I wrote a book called Honey Lingus, all about honey and, how to use honey in recipes and how honey is not exactly sugar, although it's sweet, and kind of, its properties, how to cook with it, how to enhance flavors, where you want sweetness, but not this kind of vulgar sweetness. So I was in a Facebook group, I believe it was about food blogging. And this was, probably going back, 8 months, 9 months, a year. And I met a woman, who happens to be our guest heretic today. And her name is Chrissie Manion Zaerpoor. She's the author of The Art of Mead Tasting and Food Pairing. And actually, I think the first thing that we discussed was this Midas touch, wasn't it, Chrissie?
Yeah, I think it was.
And
I'm very jealous, by the way, that you got to be at that dinner and got to meet Michael Jackson. My bookshelf is full of his books, and I would have loved to have met him.
Yeah, he was nice. I mean, we didn't like really sit and chat, but yeah, it was a really nice event, and that was like one of the good things about where I lived when I lived in southern Jersey, is that we were close to Philly, and there were some pretty cool events that they would do down there. And but yeah, it was definitely one of those experiences that I'm glad that my husband and I, even though we didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, we saved our pennies and and made it happen.
Those kinds of events, like where you spend more than you should have to eat a meal whose ingredients aren't worth the cost, right? But you end up with this lifetime memory, turn out to be some of the best money you've ever spent. That consistently happens for me.
Well, I think that's where things are. We're totally off topic already. I think that's
because I'm older than both of you and funnier than either of you.
I'm not sure about that. But no, seriously, I think that's where a lot of people are looking for. And that's what, is starting to happen. We're moving, and we're not that we're not still consumers, who like to buy our little gadgets and all this kind of stuff. But I think that people, especially during economic downturns, are looking more for experiences than just more crap to fill up their houses.
I agree with you completely.
Yeah. So tell me, Chrissie, what first piqued your interest in mead?
Well, my first interest in mead happened when I was way underage in high school and exposed, like so many of us are, to the forced reading of Beowulf in high school English class.
I thought she would say alcohol.
Well, I mean, it was alcohol, but I mean, it was like the idea of alcohol, right? Because like you don't know anything about it yet.
Yeah.
But just this whole idea of like wine made from honey, and
Yes.
that it used to be called ambrosia and nectar of the gods, and it had all these magical properties, and it was so old and so mysterious. I don't know, I was seduced in the first moment, and how could you not be?
Right. And actually, I talk about that a little bit in Honeylingus. Just even the concept of honey in general has this very seductive. I think all of us, no matter what your language is, I think everyone has this kind of romantic appreciation for honey and these older products like mead.
Absolutely. And all the legends completely tie into that. I mean, I think our collective emotional attachment to that has roots that are just thousands of years old, because so many cultures have in their legends and mythology the idea that mead and honey have these properties of making you honey-tongued or giving you the gift of poetry, these magical seduction powers and aphrodisiacs. I mean, it's just completely inseparable from the idea of honey and mead.
Right. Absolutely. So then, you talked about mead, is this honey wine. Are there other types of mead that are not made from honey? Because sometimes I hear it just called mead, and then other times people call it honey mead, as if there's a strawberry mead or something else that you could extract the sweetness from and turn into mead. What does mead mean?
There are, in fact, strawberry meads, and some are excellent. And one of the best ones is made in Pennsylvania, as a matter of fact.
There you go.
But the kind of generally accepted definition of mead is that the primary fermentation sugar should be honey. So it doesn't mean it's the exclusive fermentation sugar.
Okay.
Just like craft beers in the U.S., which are not just made from malted grain, right? There's all kinds of other ingredients in them. You have pumpkin ales and, apricot ales and all kinds of things. Meads also can be made with more than one ingredient, and many are.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say honey mead, it's sort of clarifying that you're talking about a mead made only with honey.
Okay.
And then there are many other kinds of meads which may be made with fruits or vegetables or spices or malted grains or grape juice or apple juice or any number of additional ingredients. There are literally thousands of different mead recipes, and I mean, they're really all categorically different recipes. Like, not the difference between my Pinot Noir and your Pinot Noir, which are essentially the same recipe, right? Just slightly different flavors. I mean, these are completely different recipes where the alcohol content might range from 4% to 20%, and one might be sparkling and one might be still, one might be sweet, one might be dry. I mean, really completely different beverages.
Sorry, what the vegetable is somebody putting in their mead? Because when you said that, I was like, whoa, asparagus?
Yeah.
I don't know. What goes in?
Well, I haven't seen any asparagus. I've definitely, so there's capsamels, which are made with hot peppers, are very popular.
Ah, gotcha.
And those can range from just gently warm to like gratuitously fiery hot pepper meads. There are pumpkin meads. And I've seen a cucumber mead. So there's not a lot of vegetables, but there are some. Yeah.
Okay, so they're like the fruiting vegetables, not kale.
Right. I've never
never seen actually
carrots.
I tried the pepper mead, and it's something really interesting because you get the familiar taste, but it's like chocolate with pepper. You know, it's the familiar taste, but with a twist, and it's really intriguing. You know.
Anybody putting bacon in their mead?
No, I don't think so.
Yes,
really?
Are. Yes.
All right, that's something for me.
Especially,
you're not the expert. Wait a minute. What do you think we have Chrissie here for? You're like answering her questions.
Yeah.
You know what? The great thing about mead is anybody can be an expert. All you have to do is like jump in and start tasting it and drinking it, and boom, you're an expert. So
see, I'd be drunk before I'd be an expert.
Yes.
I'd be like, what is? I don't care. Just pour some more. Okay.
But there are a few places making maple bacon mead, particularly.
Sounds Canadian.
And even if the bacon's not actually in the mead, it's like the ideal pairing accompaniment.
Right.
So think about bacon, right, drizzled with maple syrup or honey, and you get an idea of how honey and therefore mead can complement bacon and, in fact, any kind of pork dish. They're like made for each other.
Anybody doing coffee mead?
Lots and lots of people are doing coffee meads. Actually, one of the most spectacular pairings, I think, in my book is coffee mead paired with tiramisu. And coffee, and coffee mead also can have some resonance with the idea of like a Thai coffee, that they serve in Asian restaurants. So coffee meads actually go really well with Southeast Asian food as well.
See, when I think coffee mead, I think brunch. And then and then that like what you were talking about, the maple bacon. Having like a nice brunch with like all of those flavors, and then your coffee is actually a coffee mead. I can see that. Yeah,
I can totally see that too.
You're getting my juices flowing here.
Champagne style sparkling meads, replacing champagne cocktails at brunch are terrific too.
Right.
French toast with a mimosa made with mead instead of champagne. Yum.
Right. Now, I think you say something in the book about meads made with hops.
Yes.
Okay. Is that, first of all, I guess there's probably, different varieties where there's champagne style or kind of, more wine-like style. But I guess where I'm going with this is that there's a lot of people concerned about gluten intolerance. I'm assuming there's no gluten in there, but if somebody wanted to take like a champagne-y, a bubbly, hoppy, mead and use that as a beer replacement, does that work?
That totally works. And actually, that's one of the gateways that many people walk through as new mead consumers. So many people are feeling a lot better on gluten-free diets. And one of the first things they miss is beer, right? So and then they may or may not like cider and may or may not like wine. but virtually all meads are gluten-free. The exception, which I'll just mention because for some people, gluten is a serious health concern, like people with
Right.
celiacs who are extremely sensitive. So there's a category of meads called braggots,
Okay.
Braggot, which are kind of a hybrid between beer and wine, and they're made with malted grain, and that can be barley or rye or wheat. And those typically do have gluten in them and are very similar to beers. So if you're gluten intolerant, you want to avoid braggots.
Uh-huh.
But with that one exception, and really, braggots are a very, very small percentage of all the meads that are made. I'm going to just kind of guess way less than 1% of all meads are braggots.
Okay.
So if you exclude just that one little category, all other meads are gluten-free.
Okay. And it would say braggots on it.
It would not. Yeah, it would say braggot.
Okay,
Yeah.
it would say braggot. Yeah, so that people wouldn't yet. There's no confusion or something undisclosed, for lack of a better explanation.
That's correct. It would not be undisclosed. There are a lot of meaderies in Croatia, Nicola. Have you had mead?
Not really sure because I wasn't really sure about the term mead. What does it mean? In the beginning, I thought it was a honey grape. Because we have something similar here that we do with honey. It's basically I'm not sure how you say it, or is it grape? The strong alcoholic beverage, yeah. So we have the honey grape, and I thought it was that, but then I remembered that mead is actually honey wine, and I did taste some of it, not much, but I did remember that pepper one, and it's really an interesting thing. I know that the ancient Romans used it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Greeks, Romans,
among others. Yeah. I'm not sure how to say mead in Croatian. In Czech, it's medovina. In Estonian, it's modu, and it's mjod in many Slavic languages.
Yeah.
I don't know if
So-
any of those are ringing a bell as similar.
Medovina.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's medovina, and honey grape would be medovacha. So it's like similar, very.
Yeah, and honey grape is a common variant here in the U.S. as well. We call it piment, which is actually an ancient Roman word, and they had it as well. So there you'd mix grape juice and honey together and then ferment it. So it's not sweetened wine, but rather wine that has honey added to the must, and then it can be fermented all the way to dryness. It can be a very dry red or white wine.
Actually, that's one of the questions that I had, because I think when people think mead, they think of this syrupy concoction, right? They think of something that's very, like, and to be honest, you talked before we started, you were saying something about a meadery in Pennsylvania, actually is in this conversation. And then, I've seen them in these kind of boutique wineries around the country. And in Canada, in Quebec, there's a bee museum where they sell hydromel. Oh, sorry, not hydromel, or melomel or hydromel.
It can be both. So hydromel is the French word.
Okay, that's why I'm getting confused.
Melomel is kind of a specialty vocabulary word for fruit mead. So like the strawberry mead that we mentioned earlier, it would be made partly from some kind of fruit juice and partly from honey.
Okay. And so for the most part, I found them very sweet and kind of, what's the word I'm looking for without sounding obnoxious? Is like sticky, but
cloying.
No, like more. See, this is my problem. I'm on the border of kind of like insulting the producer, where it's like an entry level attempt at making something. You know what I'm saying? Like you go to some of these wineries.
I totally know what you're saying.
Yes.
So this is actually a really great point, because I've heard this a lot, and and even more so with people who are a little bit older, whose first mead experience was many years ago. So let me give you a little background information on how things have evolved, and then I'll directly answer the question. So in the early 90s, there were like 25 meaderies in the US, and I think only one had national distribution. Now there are over 400 meaderies in the US, and there are about 30 in Canada. And so suddenly there's a lot more, right? There's a lot of growth. So I'm going to just go out on a limb here and guess that, like most people, your first experiences with wine and beer were also very low end. Lots of people barely of drinking age get introduced to these, low end starter beers like Pabst Blue Ribbon and Budweiser and so forth, right? Which have nothing to do with fine craft beers.
This is true.
Absolutely nothing, right? And similarly, there are some very cheap wines out there, which are completely unremarkable and flaccid and not anything you'd really want to drink again. But they have nothing to do with the transcendent fine wines that are also available.
Right.
And there's no reason to think that cider or soda pop or mead should be any different. So are there inexpensive, dull meads out there? Absolutely. And do fine meads cost more? Also, absolutely. But I'm telling you, there are transcendently beautiful meads available just about everywhere these days.
Right. Okay.
But you shouldn't expect to get them for $5 a bottle.
No. But, and that's the thing is that I know, for example, I don't know if they sell mead, but, I remember in South Jersey, there was a winery that used to do a lot of these like fruit wines, like just like these really like talk about cloying. I mean, they were just really just, it was almost like Kool-Aid, with alcohol in it. And they were expensive. They weren't cheap. And I guess they always seemed like they were in the dessert category. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. So where you're talking about meads that are with meals, I think many of our experiences, and it's not necessarily bad, but I don't always want, that sweetness in my wine or honey wine. And I think
absolutely,
I think that's what, yeah.
And there are lots of dry meads, dry, off dry, semi-sweet, barely sweet. There are a lot of options. So this is one of the reasons why I really recommend going to meaderies, to their tasting rooms to buy mead, rather than going to a grocery store to buy mead.
Right.
Because in the meadery, you get to taste.
Right.
And there are now meaderies in 46 states.
Wow.
So almost no matter where you live, you're not that far from a meadery, which definitely was not the case 10 years ago.
Right. And you told me that we have one here on the island. I knew we had wineries on the island, but I did not realize that there is also a meadery, or unless that's part of the winery that we have on the other side of the island.
Yeah, and sometimes wineries do make mead, incidentally, and some breweries make meads.
Right.
But in Hawaii, you have two dedicated exclusive meaderies. One is Nani Moon on the island of Kauai, and the other is Volcano Meadery on the Big Island.
Yeah, that's my island. So next time I go down there, I'm going to have to do some mead sampling.
Yeah, and volcanoes.
Sure do you know your mead?
That's a whole other show.
Yeah.
I haven't had the pleasure of tasting Volcano's meaderies, but I've had several of the meads from Nani Moon, and they're quite delicious.
Oh.
And in the best kind of way, they're regional meads too. So she's using tropical honeys.
Right.
She's using local tropical fruits, like star fruits and mangoes and guavas and so forth.
Right.
And so they really have this sense of place, which I think is also really one of the beautiful things about honey that I know you'll appreciate after writing your book, right? The wildflower honey demonstrates terroir like almost no other agricultural product does.
Yes. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And then we have, just wonderful honeys here too. Kiawe honey or coconut honey, different types of citrus honey. Yeah, we've got some Lahua. I mean, there's some really impressive ones, that are incredible. Like, even when I was writing the book, I was in New Jersey and didn't have a lot of exposure to this kind of diversity of honey. I put it that way. There was the buckwheat honey and the orange and, this and that, but, there was, here, there are, I think the, differences in flavors of the honeys are much more diverse.
Oh, I completely agree with you. Yeah, tropical and rainforest honeys are extraordinary. And what's so exciting is those varietal attributes transfer into the mead as well. So if you have a traditional mead or a honey mead, one made only from honey and no other ingredients, basically the honey is the only ingredient, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every flavor attribute in the mead comes from the honey.
Right.
And so if you've got Lehua honey or meadow foam honey or linden tree honey, or whatever it is, basically all the aromatics and flavors are coming directly from that varietal honey.
Right. Okay. Awesome. So
talk about sexy, right?
Yeah. Well,
exactly my thoughts.
Let's go a little bit less sexy. What about medicinal qualities of mead? Are there attributes that come through mead differently than just the straight up honey?
Well, there are many different answers. So the Food and Drug Administration and the Alcohol Tax and Trade Bureau would like you to know that alcohol is bad for you, and there can never be any statement of health properties on an alcohol bottle in the United States.
Yes.
So setting that aside, other answers are very different. There's a researcher in Sweden who's experimenting with some bacteria and yeast in honey, which have antibiotic properties. And they're actually doing real university academic research on the possibility of both the honey and the mead being an alternative antibiotic and being licensed and marketed that way. So that's exciting in one answer. There's an entire category of meads called metheglins, which are spice meads. And the word metheglin is a Welsh word that comes from medicine. So medicine and metheglin are actually cognate words. So if you go back several hundred years prior to patent medicines, botanicals were used as medicines. And many of those are seasonal plants that are only available in the summer. But of course, illnesses tend to hit in the winter.
Right.
So one of the most popular ways to preserve those medicinal plants for winter use was to put them in alcohol, and particularly to put them in mead. And so there's a very long tradition of homebrew meads, particularly made as medicinal meads.
Wow.
And actually there's a meadery in Mead, Washington called Hierophant Meadery, which is run by a young couple who studied botanical medicine prior to becoming mead makers. And they make a whole range of herbal tinctures and herbal meads, which of course the labels can't say are medicinal, but if you look at the ingredients, they have long traditional use as medicinal herbs.
Right. And it makes sense, because where I was coming from in that thought was just the use of tinctures, which are in alcohol, right? So,
right.
Whether it's your black cohosh or your, walnut hulls or whatever, they preserve them in alcohol, and they potentiate the effects of the chemical constituents of these different plants.
Kind of like propolis.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. In fact, I make a whole hive mead in which I include propolis and royal jelly and bee pollen and beeswax beyond honey. So it kind of has the flavor attributes of the entire hive products. But even beyond these tinctures, and of course, many ingredients are either water soluble or fat soluble or alcohol soluble. So by putting them in alcohol, such as mead, you're able to get additional flavor constituents and medicinal constituents out of them compared to just cooking with them in fat and water.
Right.
But then honey also has many health properties, as many people are aware. And fermented foods have many health properties, as many people are aware. So if you have raw honey, which already has health properties, and then you ferment it, and the fermentation adds health properties, how could the resulting fermented honey not also be particularly healthy?
Right.
The TTB doesn't want you to think about these things, but
Shh, we won't tell them.
and then if you look at the old literature, there are many, many references to mead being drunk as a general health tonic, and to very elderly people attributing mead with credit for sexual activity long into the 70s and 80s, virility and fertility later than you would expect it. There's a delightful quote in one 17th century book about this man in his 80s who every year had a child.
Wow.
And he was attributing that property to his habit of mead drinking. So there's a lot of old references in old literature about mead being a health beverage.
At 70 or 80, it may not be him drinking the mead, but whoever he's with having his babies.
There you go. And of course, that's the case too, right? Mead was the original honeymoon gift. In fact, it's the source of the word honeymoon.
That's right.
And mead was the classic thing for toasting at the wedding. And I submit to you that it's the ideal toasting beverage for modern wedding toasts everywhere. And it was very common to gift the bride and groom with a case of fine mead to lubricate the honeymoon, so to speak, right? What better way to kind of warm up the action and assist with the getting to know each other and fertility. So the honeymoon couple would basically lock themselves up with a case of mead for a month.
It sounds like a plan. We should try it out sometime. I'm
going down to a Volcano meadery and getting a couple of cases. I'll sample at home. So how universal is mead across cultures?
To me, that is one of the most, it actually literally raised the hairs on the back of my neck when you asked this question. To me, this is one of the most beautiful aspects there is of mead. No matter who you are or what part of the world you're from, your ancestors made mead. Honeybees are everywhere. So while grapes have a fairly narrow band that they thrive in, and hops have a fairly narrow band that they thrive in, flowers and bees thrive everywhere, even where there aren't any people. Right. And humans everywhere, possibly as long ago as 40,000 years ago or even longer, have made mead just about everywhere. So it's absolutely universal. People on every continent except Antarctica have a history of mead making.
Right. And, while we talk about the resurgence of meaderies in the U.S. and Canada, how many other cultures do you feel really have, maybe even if it wasn't at the center, but still are very much more connected than we are to our mead history?
There are several. So the Slavic cultures have a very long history of mead making and honey culturing. Poland particularly, and kind of the Baltic states and the Slavic region generally, have a lot of wild forests and wild meadows. And because of altitude and latitude, those lands weren't particularly suitable for grape growing or even to some extent for grain growing. That's not exclusively true. Poland actually has very high production of wheat and barley and rye, but not all of the lands are suitable to that. So where there are wild forests and wild meadows, there is honey. And in the absence of other sugars to ferment, those became the favored things to make alcohol from. Poland and Lithuania have the only large-scale industrial production of mead anywhere in the world. So I'm really talking about like breweries on the scale of Budweiser, for example.
Right.
So they make vast quantities of mead in Poland and Lithuania. Another culture that has a very, very strong identity with mead is Ethiopia.
Right.
And again, the Kaffa forest in Ethiopia, which is the place that that coffee originates, has enormous numbers of bees and honey production. In Ethiopia, most honey is fermented at home. More than 80% of the country's entire honey production is fermented into mead. No other country ferments a bigger percentage of their honey, but there are only a couple of commercial meaderies. Almost all of it is done at home as home brewing. So for Ethiopians, homebrew mead, it's called tej in Ethiopia, has a very strong sense of identity. India, incidentally, is another place that's beginning to rediscover its original attachment to mead. So the word mead is so old that in the original Proto-Indo-European language that predates all modern languages, something like that must have meant mead or honey, because in English we have mead, but in modern Sanskrit we have, and I don't know how to pronounce it, I know how it's written in English characters, but madhu or midhu or something like this is the modern word for honey.
Right.
It's cognate, right? So it's that old. And the Rig Veda text in India mentions mead in many places, and that book is thousands of years old.
Right.
And in fact, the very oldest hard evidence, and I'm talking about hard archaeological evidence of fermenting honey into alcohol, was found in Jiahu, China. And that archaeological site, Adrian, is 9,000 years old.
Whoa.
We're talking about pottery that was made a good 3,000 or 4,000 years before pottery was being manufactured in the Mediterranean region.
Right.
They were making pottery and they were fermenting honey. And the pottery residue clearly shows that it's got beeswax in it. It clearly shows that there was a fermented drink that was made partly from honey in those jars.
Wow,
isn't that beautiful? I mean, it just
wonderful.
makes the hairs on the back of my neck.
stand. That happened to me just as you were saying that. I was like, that's really, that's wild.
I think it's a really, really beautiful thing. That is just so universal.
That's wonderful. That I love hearing about that. So, when I don't know if I'm right about this, but I kind of see two major categories of people who would be looking at your book, right? So you've got the people who already enjoy mead and they want to understand better, or at the very least from, your research and perspective, how to pair food and what kind of foods they can prepare at home that would go very well, because you have a lovely recipe section. But then on the other side, there are those who, maybe didn't think about mead, like I was saying before, maybe the gluten intolerant person who really loves their beer and, I can't get that flavor. And, maybe mead, they might find a hoppy mead to be a good, replacement, or someone who is just this is the first time they're really even thinking, like they just never noticed a mead on the shelves. They never noticed that there's a meadery in their area, and now they want to start using it, or they purchased one on vacation and now they don't know what to do with it, and they're waiting for the perfect accompaniment for it, or the perfect setting to enjoy it in, but maybe they don't know where to start. So I guess where I'm going with this is, how do you suggest people use your book, make the most use out of it?
What a great question. So I see, I guess a few different use cases for the book, and all of these would be great reasons to buy and enjoy the book. As you say, I think there are a lot of kitchens and pantries with a couple of bottles of mead. They picked it up on a vacation, or somebody gave it to him as a present. And somehow there's this intimidation factor of they're not ready to open the bottle yet. So chapter 2 of the book is kind of a mead appreciation chapter. Like, what is mead? How do I open it? How do I use it? How can I tell by looking at the label what the characteristics are going to be of what's inside? Is there a way just from looking at the outside to tell, is this sweet? Is it dry? Is it strong? Is it soft? What should I expect when I open it? And once I open it, how fast do I have to drink it?
Yes.
How quick is it going to spoil? And if I don't open it, how long can I hold it? Is it ever going to be a problem? Right? So all those kinds of questions are addressed in chapter 2, which is just kind of a basic mead appreciation chapter. And then there are 3 indexes in the book. One is just a general index, one is a mead index, and one is a food index. So if, for example, you had that strawberry mead that we were talking about at the beginning of the show, right? You can look up in the mead index, strawberry mead, and actually I'm looking it up in the index right now. So strawberry melomels, and again, melomel is that specialty word that means fruit mead. I've got entries on page 108, 112, 121, 237, and 372 about strawberry meads. And if you go to those pages, it's going to suggest things that you can serve with a strawberry mead.
Right.
Or it's going to be recommending particular brands of strawberry mead.
Gotcha.
So for instance, a spinach salad with fresh strawberries sliced on it and a raspberry vinaigrette is going to be a terrific accompaniment to an off-dry strawberry mead. Yum, right?
Yeah, I like that. I think
and then conversely, if you're kind of trying to decide what am I going to make for dinner, and you're thinking, I don't know, grilled fish, right? You can look in the food index for grilled fish, and that'll refer you back to places in the text where various mead recommendations are made. And grilled flavors, for example, go great with oaked meads or barrel-aged meads. So if you've got an off-dry traditional mead, say made from one of your lovely Hawaiian honeys, and it's been aged in an oak barrel, then you pick up both the tropical flavors that are going to complement, say, a grilled fish with a tropical fruit salsa, and you've got the barrel oaky flavors that are going to complement the grilled flavors of your fish.
Right.
And bam, you've got a terrific pairing.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. I like that. Yeah, the first thing I thought was pineapples on the fish when you started describing it.
Yeah. And there are
Yeah.
some great pineapple melomels. In fact, there's a place here in Portland, Oregon that makes, no, sorry, it's not Portland. I can't think now where it is, but there's a smoked pineapple
Ooh.
cilantro chili pepper mead.
Ooh, so it's like a pineapple salsa mead.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it's freaking delicious.
Oh, I can imagine. That's awesome. That is really, I had no idea there was so much to know about mead. That's really incredible. And
Oh,
I don't
have
even
just barely cracked the door.
Oh, I
open
know.
for you.
And I'm sorry because I'm taking a course this month and I've got to like run out the door within the next 5 minutes. But I would love to have you back if you ever are able to, square away some time. I would love to have you back and talk more about your book and your experience. I mean, this is a really, really, impressive topic. And I don't even know how you did this much research. I mean, it must have taken you years to put this together.
It seems to me that this will be a 5-part episode at least.
Yeah, exactly. And next time we'll have to actually have Mead with us.
That would be a real pleasure. It's been a lot of fun talking with you today, and I would love to talk with you more. I love to talk to anybody about Mead.
Yeah, we'll send you our addresses, so you can ship us that mead for the next episode.
All right.
Well, you got it locally. I've got it locally. We'll all show up. What we might do? Maybe we'll do a Facebook Live event on the actual day that your book goes live.
That could be a lot of fun. We could have Nicola with Croatian mead. There are some excellent Croatian meaderies.
Yeah.
And Adrian, right there on Hawaii, you've got Volcano Meadery. You could go pick up a bottle or two.
Exactly.
We've
And
got
it'll be 10
12
o'clock in the
meaderies
morning
in
for me,
Oregon.
too. That'll be even more
Excellent.
interesting.
So we can do the brunch mead tasting.
Exactly. So your Facebook page is facebook.com/meadandfood. And you have meadandfood.com, which should be live by the time this airs.
It will be.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chrissie. If there any parting words before we let you go?
Just go drink more mead.
All right, great. Thank you so much. I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with that, by the way. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your passion about this topic. And I will report back to you with some of the things that I find.
I'll look forward to hearing from you. Thanks
All
so
right.
much. It's been a real pleasure today.
Same here. Thanks.
The Nutrition Heretic Podcast is a production of Savor the Journey, LLC. Our audio editor is Nikola Popovich. Our podcast manager is Crystal McLean, and our operations manager is Linda Hansen. I'm your host, Adrian Hugh, the Nutrition Heretic. You can find us at nutritionheretic.com, where you can download the Nutrition Heretic's free shit list of 7 health foods to avoid like the plague. You can also listen to previous episodes at nutritionheretic.com/podcast. Be sure to like us on social media for updates. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/nutritionheretic and on Twitter @NutriHeretic. Contact us with show ideas, questions, or if you just want to be a guest. And don't forget to rate our podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. Thanks.